Hello and welcome to another episode of Glory of Golden State Gaming. I'm your host Swamp Swimmer, and the Larry and Mo to my Curly, Vespasian and Caps.
What's up, everybody?
Hey, everyone.
So today we're going to go over a brief preview overview of the 2022 points updates for the Ninth Age. And we are lucky enough to have Mr. Caps on the video with us, who is part of the team who did that. I don't know specifically your title or the name of the team. I don't even know what I'm supposed to call you.
Yeah, so I'm on the rules team, which is the one that has authority over the final update, or like the yearly update. So yeah, I'm one of the 5 guys you want to hate because your army went up in points.
Yeah, we all saw the tier list. I think I'll be happy. It's different for Vespasian. But just to introduce, just tell me a little bit about who you are. What armies do you play? I know you've been a part of the ETC team, so just give me a basic overview.
Yeah, so I've been playing Ninth Age for 5 years now, 6 years, about a year after it came out. I mainly play ogres. I've dabbled in ID and Saurians. I was captain of USA ETC 2 years ago, and I've been on the ETC team for 4 years now. And hopefully we'll be on next year, but obviously we haven't made the final selection, so we'll see if that works. But yeah, and then I've been on the rules team. This is now my 4th point update for the rules team. So I do that as well.
Sweet. So what you're telling me is you're halfway decent at this game.
I'm okay.
But so yeah, the first thing I guess we want to talk about is we're lucky enough that you can kind of give us an inside view on how the rules team came to these decisions. And I don't know, take it away. I'd love to just hear what you have to say about it. Let me know if you want me to put up the image you sent me.
Oh, sure. So the point update is a pretty complex thing, and it starts kind of from the start of the year. The data team starts collecting tournament data, both on how armies do against each other, how they do overall. We separate team data from individual data, and they collect all this stuff over the year, and then starting in September, they'll format a list. They'll give us a tier list, which army performed the best, which army performed the worst, and generally kind of where the armies stacked against each other. They'll also give us a lot of numbers as far as usage data in these tournaments. So a Shrieking Horror appeared in, 20% of VC lists or whatever it was. So we get that sort of data from the data team. We've done a little bit different every year, but there's some form of community feedback as well. In years past, we've had some selected experts on the army books fill out stuff. This year, we just released a bunch of surveys. So if you saw a bunch of surveys come out in, I think it was October and November, hopefully you filled one out because your input mattered, because they take all that survey data and they basically combine it with the tournament data to say, here's what got used, here's also what players feel like is really good or bad. And then that number gets weighted based on the tier list. So we construct a tier list, every army 1 to 16. This year we did 1 to 15 because KOE was coming out right at the same time, so we just forgot about KOE. We basically took 3 separate lists and averaged them. So we took the data team's list, the rules team made their own list of what we felt like was the best army and the worst army, and then we took the data from the surveys that said what's the best, what's the worst. So we took all 3 of those numbers, averaged them, and it ended up, the lists were pretty similar. So we ended up with a 1 to 16 list. And so the tournament data and the survey data get combined to give you a number. and that number will be between 1 and 0. A 0 is something that appears in literally every army list. It's taken all the time, and that's what we don't really want to see. We want to see variety. So something that scores a 0 means that it's in every list, and it's probably too good if it's showing up in every list.
Probably.
Conversely, something that scores a 0.999 is the exact opposite. It's never taken. Everybody thinks it's terrible and probably should go down in points. And ideally what we want is most things to be between like probably about 0.4 and 0.6. That's a relatively decent standard deviation, and it means that things are taken relatively averagely. So where the tier list matters is the higher you are on the tier list, it shifts where we do the cutoff for what's overpowered and underpowered. So let's say something that's in the middle of the list, orcs and goblins, which is consistently like the middle of the road army.
Let me bring that list up real quick just so people can see it. I got it up right here.
So you'll see the big table that gets printed out for everyone. It's, what was it this year? 4,000 individual lines of every entry in every army book gets a score for this. And so you get your number. You get, for example, a warrior of the dark god giant was, what was it this year? It was a 0.43. So that's perfect. It's used. Yeah, it's not used all the time. So all these numbers are put into an algorithm that gives us suggested point updates. So the warrior's giant at 0.43 was recommended for no change. But Feldrak elders scored pretty low. They got a 0.15, which means that they're in a lot of lists. They are very common. And so they got recommended for an increase. The number that we use for a cutoff for an increase or decrease changes based on where you are on the tier list. So I can't remember which army was bottom. It was Beast Herds or Saurians or something like that.
Beast Herds.
Beast Herds.
Yeah.
Actually, before we go forward, just a question for the whole group. Are there any surprises that you, after all the data got compiled and this list came out, were any of these armies surprises to you, either how low or how high they were?
So I was a little surprised. Just personally, I thought Vermin Swarm would score higher. It's a little harder just because it's in alpha, so I think there wasn't as much data. I was personally a little surprised that I thought UD were a little bit better, but they scored a little lower than I was anticipating. But overall, I mean, I think most people, at least on the rules team and most of the team surveys, came back with pretty similar data. I mean, you might switch things a couple spots, but
yeah,
there weren't a lot of armies where there was drastic disagreement. The two that were sort of interesting to me, because like I said, they separate out team data and individual data, and Ogre Kingdoms and Vermin Swarm were interesting because Ogre Kingdoms was actually top of the team data, top of the individual data, which I thought was kind of surprising, honestly. And Vermin Swarm were the bottom of the individual data, but the team data was exactly flipped, where Vermin Swarm were the top and Ogres were the bottom. Which
that's super interesting.
Felt not quite right. I honestly, and when you average them out, you get about in the middle, which is probably about right.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the one surprise for me is I thought Dwarven Holds would be higher up. I feel like Dwarven Holds is stronger than 11th place.
So I mean, a lot of the, honestly, kind of Dwarven Holds to Ogre Cons or ID, somewhere in that area, like, they're all pretty close. You know,
okay.
There wasn't a huge variation there. So, you know, a couple spots on the list didn't make a massive difference.
And isn't singles, and I won't hold you to this, but I think at a high level, the singles data is given a little bit of preference for this points update over the teams. So I could see that with dwarves, Kenyon. Right?
Yeah.
Like I think teams is a lot stronger for dwarves than, anyways. Yeah.
So
okay.
singles is weighted a little higher, partly because we have a lot more singles tournaments as well. But Also because the game
Rotating matchups,
yeah, it's a little bit harder to figure everything out when you don't get random matchups. But yeah, so if you were Demon Legions, which is the top list, you might have something that scores a 0.3 that the algorithm says, hey, it needs to go up in points. Whereas if you're a Beastard player, something that you have that scores a 0.3 might be recommended for no increase because you're a lower tier book. And so the tier level really changes the threshold for what gets increased and what gets decreased. And the other thing is how far you are from that cutoff number.
Mm-hmm.
So something that scores a 0.001, which is the lowest it can be, is going to be recommended for a much larger increase than something that scores like a 0.29 if the cutoff is 0.3. So really if you're looking at your army, what you don't want to happen is you don't want your army to have a single list that shows up all the time and has a bunch of items that are always taken. Because and you don't want that to end up high on the tier list in addition.
Highborn Elves.
Because that's the recipe to get a lot of point increases, which is partly what happened to some of the high elf lists, which we can get to later, is high elves scored relatively high on the tier list. They were 4th. But there was very little variation in their list. They had a couple things that were showing up in literally every list. And so high elves are interesting, and we can talk about them in a little bit, but they probably got more point decreases than any of the other top armies. But they also, that list got hit a lot harder than,
that common list is what got hit hard, but all the less commonly taken items are boosted up in return.
Because so one of the things we look at is we want to look at both the army's external balance, how well it's performing against other armies, and then we also try to look at the army's internal balance of what sort of variety are taken, how often are the different choices taken. So Orcs and Goblins is a great example. It's middle of the pack, it performs pretty well, it's not super high or super low, and it had great variation. There's not a set like this one thing is taken all the time. Whereas high elves were, if we stay on that topic, they were relatively high. They were a strong army book, but they had really poor internal balance because there was one list or a small variety of lists that were getting taken all of the time. It was Seaguard Corps, some Griffin Commander, some Bolt Throwers,
Queen's Guard,
Queen's Guard, and some Phoenixes. It was some variation of that, and so you had some poor internal balance. So again, we try to do some things to try to both improve the external power level of the book and also try to find a nice balance point.
And I think one thing I'll comment on, because this is both kudos to the staff who do this. The data entry that is required to accomplish this process is massive, and also it's a good exercise. Having personally entered hundreds of Highborn Elf lists into the macro, you actually would be surprised. So often you hear that's never taken, and if you actually do the work, you realize that there's a lot of variety, and so to actually trigger this. This algorithm to tell you that something is never taken is kind of a big deal. So
and I actually really like doing the yearly point increases. It's actually one of my favorite things on Roll Team because it is really interesting, and there are a lot of things that, say, in the US we don't see as much, and then you're like, oh, that's not very good, and then you look at the data and you're like, wait, really? And the 5 Rule Team members are from all over the country. I mean, it's me in the US. We got a member in Sweden, a member in Poland, a member in Austria, and a member in England. And they're very different metas. And one person will be like, "Oh, this is so good," and we're like, "We never see that." And so it's interesting. It's a lot of fun. And we started back in September. We kind of initially start off by talking about, are there any overarching goals? that we had for the update. So last year we were trying to encourage infantry and kind of discourage single models. It wasn't like we wanted to whack them really hard, but we wanted to shift the balance a little bit towards bigger infantry blocks. This year we had a long conversation about mages, because by far one of the most commonly taken things in the whole game are master mages.
Yeah.
And so we did, one of the things you'll see in the point increases, there was some rebalancing between the levels of the mages. So apprentices went down in general and masters went up in general.
I think that's the common theme I saw when I was looking through the points changes was it seemed like every base level for casters went down and every adept and master upgrade went up.
Yeah, so when you look at the point updates, you will see all of the masters got more expensive by about 20 points, I think. And all the adepts, so the master increase actually went up 45 points because the base adept went down 15. And now again, we adjusted for things that there are a couple entries that are either only master or started, like a high elf caster can't be an apprentice, he just starts at an adept. So there was some fudging, but that was kind of one of the goals we wanted to rebalance. So we started at kind of a higher level. Is there anything game-wide we think we want to tweak? And that was kind of the big thing this year. We also kind of open threads and say, look, are there any problematic lores, special items, or are there any unit entries that we feel cannot be fixed by points? And every year there are a couple of them. Like last year, I think it was the Duke on Pegasus. And the year before that, it was UD casters. So this year, there were a couple of changes. There's some changes to some of the entry sections, specifically for warriors and I think beast herds and high elves, where they went to a point system rather than a percentage system. And it's because for a couple of the entries, we were having a hard time putting things at the points we felt like they should be at and still allowing people to, for example, for the high elves, take 3 flyers. So we wanted the army to still be able to take 3 flyers, but it was basically at a point where if we put them where we wanted, that wouldn't be able to happen anymore. So that was a big change. There were some changes to some of the spells, and I don't think there was anything. I think
the Druidism one is a big change, which is the attribute can only be cast once per phase. And I think the other really big one is you guys swapped Breath of Corruption and Pentagram of Pain in Occultism. So now the one is Breath of Corruption.
And that was, we were trying, again, that was kind of going along with trying to make apprentices better. That change has no impact on adepts or masters, but it is better for apprentices. I think Fireball became replicable. I think there are a couple of the other ones that had like small tweaks where either the range or the casting value changed.
Yeah, most of the other changes were making problem spells better. Like for instance, Dance Macabre in Evocation, it's making it more useful. Yeah. The 12-inch move instead of 8-inch.
Tongues. Yeah.
And the Druidism change was in part, we felt Druidism was a pretty strong lore overall. The other thing that kind of motivated that change was we have 2 armies that are coming out very shortly. So KOE already dropped a couple days ago, and Saurians is the next book up, and both of those armies are going to be relatively elite armies that have access to Druidism. And there was a long conversation about that, and we felt like it possibly was going to be too strong on those elite armies, so that's why the change was made to the Druidism attribute. So those conversations start back in September. We were a little slow this year because we had like the perfect storm. We had Vermin Swarm, ID, Dark Elf, and KOE all in alpha or beta, needing point increase or like adjustments at the same time that we had the balance update coming up, at the same time that I just had a baby and Mikey Newman on the rules team had a kid a couple months ago.
Congratulations, by the way. Congratulations.
Yeah. So we were a little stretched thin, which is, I apologize, the reason that the update was a couple weeks later than it typically is. It was just, we had so much to do, we got bogged down and we weren't as quick. We do spend a lot of time on this too. Like I said, we started on the forum with posts and stuff back in September. We've had multiple calls probably every couple weeks from September till November. And then once we actually get all the data entered and we start going through, we literally go through every entry individually and then as a group, line by line, because we want to make sure that the algorithm does what we think it should do. You know, because sometimes either there's not enough data or it does things that don't make sense, or it's a dumb computer program and it doesn't know, like going back to High Elves, there was a Griffin, a very particular build for a Griffin caster where it took same, I think it was 4 items plus a guy on a Griffin. The algorithm doesn't know that you're taking all those things together. It just sees these 5 things are taken at a really high level, and so they should all go up in points. When if you do that, you're going to get that Griffin build to go up like 200 points just by itself.
Yeah.
And that's obviously not appropriate. So there's always a conversation about how's the best way to do it. And there were a couple items that were slated for increases that we didn't increase because we didn't feel like they were the problem build. And then, you know, in a couple ways, the increases were spread over a couple areas. You know, it was, some of it was put, I think in the High Elf case, a lot of it was put on the Griffin character or the Griffin mount. Whereas, you know, like with Feldrak Elders that we brought up, we actually split some of the cost into the weapon option because there was a big disparity in what weapon was taken. So it ends up being, you know, a
lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Just to accentuate the amount of a lot of work that went into this, do you mind if I just share that image you sent with to me earlier, and just briefly tell me the math that goes in here.
All right, so the column on the far right is the community survey data. So red is obviously people saying things are really good. Green is things not being used in the tournament, or being used. So red is the community survey column. The next column from the right is the tournament data. And then there's another column where it gets weighted in a specific way. Then I blocked some of this out because I didn't want to show. So normally there are 5 bars in the middle where each one of us puts in our individual prices. I hit everybody's mind just because I don't want to out anyone.
No.
But so the real important number is that column.
This one here, the final price.
Well, that's the final change, is the one you're on there. The column just to the left, the real colorful just to the left. More,
this one.
More. That one. That's the final number. That's the number that matters. So you can see that there are some things that show up that are kind of red or orange that for other books would actually trigger an increase, but there aren't increases there, and it's because beast herds were the least powerful armies, so it took a lot to trigger an increase on them. So you see that the things that were green tended to go down in price, and the things that were red for beast herds tended not to change in price. There were a couple of things that went up in price. Like I think the crown of horns at the very top went up by 5 points or something. But yeah, so that's what we look at, and there's the spreadsheet is a massive beast. It's like 3,000 lines, and we spend like 18 hours on the phone over 4 or 5 calls. Hold on, my daughter's breaking in my room.
No worries. No, that's super interesting. I'm glad you guys go into that much detail. It's seeing that spreadsheet like gives me, you know, faith that the rules team is going through their P's and Q's. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
All right, my daughter really wants to say hi, so
all right.
This is Ella.
Hi, Ella.
She's past her bedtime and trying to break.
Good night, Ella.
Good night, Ella. I think we should move on to, we're going to briefly talk about the changes on a very peripheral level about Highborn Elves, which is Vespasian's favorite army, and Beasters, which are probably my favorite army right now. And then afterwards, we'll go to a little depth into Saurian Ancients, but we'll see how much we get to. Vespasian, you've seen the point changes for Highborn Elves. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think directionally, none of the changes, surprised me. The build that Caps is talking about that has, the max size unit of Sea Guard and Core. It has the Griffin Prince or Commander with basically the same kit. Has a Master of Krennic Tower BSB, and then some Master Mage, 3 Bolt Throwers. I mean, you can and 2 Phoenixes. You can pretty much, that's like 40.
I feel like I've played that list. I feel like I've played that list.
Yeah. That list got hit really hard. In fact, I think maybe hardest of all of the sort of net lists, if such a concept exists. That being said, 30 points of that is casters, right? So that's something that all armies hit, which I think is something people forget really quickly. They're like, oh, the points went up so much. It's like, well, if you had a Master Mage, you automatically went up, 20 to 30 points, right? So,
basically, if you took a Master, subtract 20 points off the list because everybody's Master went up 20 points.
Yeah. So then what hurt, I think, also in addition was that everybody hated the Master of the Krennic Tower commander, and he got kind of a combination of design nerfs, which one was the Druidism one, obviously that hurts him, and 2 was he lost a spell. So all those things combined really hurt that net list. But I also think, and this I'll definitely stand by, there were some for the project, some pretty substantive nerfs. I know that, buffs, on underused items. Big units of Lancers, big units of Ryman Knights, some core options like Archers and Spears that don't see as much play. There was also some really nice improvements, I think, to what you can do with your flyer allotment if you're doing a Queen's Cavalier list. So going to that point system enabled some builds that didn't exist before that were literally illegal. So I think you should, in theory, see some list variety from this, as well as a bit of an a pretty sizable external balance nerf to the net list.
And I would, so this time of year is always hard because you do have some of those top armies where their lists go up, and then conversely, sometimes you'll see people in the bottom army who say, well, my list only went up 30 points, or my list only went up, it didn't change at all. So just as a little bit of perspective. So traditionally, for the 4 years I've done this, the top tier armies typically have a list that goes up somewhere between about 150 and 200 points. That's pretty usual. Probably the worst I ever saw was UD. The year they really got whacked, they had design changes and probably got about a 220 to 250 point increase. So that's what you can kind of expect. At the same time, I went through this last year. Ogres last year got like 150 point increase for the main list. Mm-hmm. It stinks. But at the same time, a little bit of perspective. 150 points is not the end of the world. You can still take your same list, you drop a piece of chaff, and it's the same list.
Yeah, those really good units are still really good. Yeah.
And a lot of times you can mitigate a lot of the worst hits on the changes by doing simple things like changing unit size or changing some equipment. For example, with the Feldrak Elders, they go up 25 points each. But if you take a great weapon instead of paired weapons, sure, it's a little bit worse, but you save 10 points. So now it's a 15 point increase. There are a lot of things you can do to mitigate it. And at the end of the world, it's still a good list, even if you have to cut a piece of chaff or cut a unit size down. Usually those lists, in the grand scheme of things, still perform pretty well. So a bit of perspective. The other thing I tell you is the place you can really benefit from these updates is look at the things that went down. And a lot of times it's doing the exact opposite. It's taking different unit sizes or picking an option that maybe isn't that good. And one of the interesting things doing this is very often the things that are considered bad are not bad. They just have a stigma attached to them, and they go down just enough, and then they start getting used. That's actually what happened to the Feldrag Elder. Is he was never used. His points went down for 2 successive updates. All of a sudden, people started using him. It was like, oh my god, this guy is amazing.
He's amazing, yeah.
Then he got spammed, and his points now are actually about where they were a couple, like 3 or 4 years ago, because people realized, like, hey, he's still pretty good.
Yeah.
So again, a little bit of perspective. I think a lot of times people see the point updates and it's the end of the world, and it's usually not. It's usually things are manageable. It sucks. I've had my list go up, and you tweak it and you find something different.
Which is a great
I like to start with
segue.
stuff that went down in points, to your point. So I like when I do list building, that's how I handle the update, is I look at that stuff.
So that's a great segue for Vespasian. You play a lot of Highborn Elves, and you see this net list going up dramatically, and you see a lot of the peripheral choices going down. Where do you see your army going in maybe the future? This is a guess. This is not a definite for your next tournament army, but like, where do you see your list going?
I'm trying to use as a theme not taking a Master of the Krennic Tower BSB, because I think that's what the project is telling me I should try not to do, and that's kind of a starting point. I like the look of some changes that I've seen, and so far just having a lot of fun building lists. I need to get some games in once the update drops. That's the main thing. So no spoilers yet. I need to get some practice rounds in.
Okay, keeping it close to the chest. I like it.
Well.
But yeah, I think High Elves are interesting. We tried to clean up some of the mounts, because the mounts were kind of a mess, because like every honor had its own mount prices, and a lot of those we figured we could probably just simplify. So I think the High Elf book hopefully should be a little easier to use. But yeah, our goal is never to make something not usable. It's to get it into that 40 to 60% usage range. And if we can hit that, then hopefully, that's where we want things to live. We'll see if we got there, or, if we went too far. Part of the problem with the Master of the Canning Tower was one of the only models that had an actual design change. We really try to avoid that, but that was a model that has gone up every year substantially in points, and it was by far the most used model in any army or any list. And we're even talking about weapon options and stuff. It was as used as it possibly, the scoring can go. And that's the second or third year it's been like that. So it finally got to a point where we said, hey, this is not fixable in points. And that's why there was a design change there. But again, I hope we still see them. I just hope we don't see them in every list.
Yeah. So let's move on to my list. The good old Beasters, bottom of the tier ranking. I love it. Beasters are primed for a big old popularity comeback.
So a couple things changed at Beastars. So the ambush sizes, I think, increased, if I remember.
I think that's for me, that's the biggest spot for changing the army. Because for everyone's tried the all ambush list, everyone's had mixed results. It's hard to make it work. Does increasing the unit sizes on all 3 people that can ambush, mongrels, wildhorns, and longhorns,
and centaurs,
my bad. Which you never see ambushing centaurs ever.
Yeah. So
is that going to change the ambush list? Is the ambush list going to be competitive? I don't know. I'm really excited to find out, to be honest. But what do you think?
And that was one of the things we asked for feedback from the different ACSs. We asked them to submit several things that they think need to change, both good and bad. And that was one of the things that the Beastard ACS submitted, was said, hey, can you consider changing our ambush unit sizes? And we had a conversation about it, because we don't listen to all of them, and some of them we ignored, but that was one we were like, I don't think it's going to break anything, and I think it might open up some interesting new lists. So yeah, and then I think the other big thing for Beast Herds is they changed to their monster allowance actually lets them potentially take more monsters than they were before. So that could be really interesting too.
The monster mash lists on Beast Herds they're fun and people like them and they do pretty well. But the scary thing with those is they're very susceptible to light shooting into cannons and the high impact shooting. If you got more of them, it's more is better.
Yeah. So we'll see if that works. We had long discussions about all of those, and we spent a lot of time. Okay, what combinations can you take? Is this too good? We'll see. We do have about a month where we kind of open it up for community feedback, and then we have one more quicker call where we're like, look, we just be sure we didn't break anything. But no,
looking through the point changes, yeah. I feel excited. Last point update, the Wild Horns got the big benefit. Like their points went down like crazy, and I started using Wild Horns in my core a lot, which I'm extremely enjoying. Wild Horns weren't touched in this update, but everything else everything else just got a minor point reduction. Nothing crazy.
Yeah. What did your most recent tournament list go up or down, Kenyon? Because you didn't use Masters, for example. So like,
yeah, I didn't use Masters.
Did you? How did it up?
I didn't check the points exactly, but it went up. I got a big chunk of points. A big chunk. Soothsayer. Yeah, because the base cost for a Soothsayer went down, 15 points? It's got to be around 50 points, 50 to 100 points I got back. That's another thing. Back to caps. All the giants in every list, giants must choose a weapon now. What was the thought process behind that?
So you can blame the Orc and Goblin giant for that. So the problem was that Orc and Goblin giant, the Wrecking Ball giant, is terrible. Or was. It was never taken. It's for 2 years in a row they've said we don't like this. But the problem is the upgrade was free, and the rest of the Orc and Giant options are actually taking a decent amount. So we had a conversation of, can we lower the base cost of the Giant and then just increase all the weapon options except for the Wrecking Ball? The problem is you can take a Giant with no weapons, and if you decrease the base cost, I think that would have been the preferable option over the Wrecking Ball Giant, if that makes sense. And so I think we would have just seen a bunch of Orc and Goblin Giants with no weapons. The other thing is, if you look at the data, there weren't a lot of Giants, hardly any being taken with no weapons.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. I think I just wanted to ETC a couple years ago, but I mean, it's really, really rare that you see a Giant with no weapons. So we basically felt like we weren't depriving anyone really of an option that they were taking, and then making it so they must take a weapon then fixes that. Basically, that's what we were going to do for the Orc and Goblin Giant, and we felt like we didn't like having one Giant not being able to take a weapon, and we didn't feel like we were limiting anyone. So yeah, Giants now have to take a weapon.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't think it's a really big. It's not a big change to the game because, as you said, most people are taking a weapon upgrade anyway.
Yeah, most people are taking the club or. Yeah, it probably. I mean, again, it might be one or two lists where you can't squeeze another monster in because that 10 points made a difference. So yeah, and then I think the rules clarity team then went through and added whatever the cheapest weapon option is as the base option, and then gave you upgrades after. So there could be a little bit of change in the Giant profiles, but ultimately they're basically the same.
All right.
But yeah, I think. I mean, do you feel like you're gonna keep taking your same list and just add a new unit in, or do you feel like you're gonna experiment with like changing the list?
I'm gonna experiment big time. I don't know if this is famously or unfamously. I tried the super heavy ambush list at Buckeye Battles one year, and I got dead last place.
So come back this year.
I'm trying. I want to try it again. I want the idea of 40 mongrels ambushing in one unit. Sorry if I spurted out some numbers there, but that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, you got to be able to fit them in the board.
Yeah, I know it's interesting. So I'm definitely gonna re-examine the ambush heavy list, and beyond that, I'm thinking of looking at the big Longhorn blocks again, but we'll see how that goes too, because the Longhorn's got a little bit of a
blocks are interesting. Sorry, I dropped. I got a baby in my lap right now. So.
You're good.
Multitasking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always interesting because when we do the points update, I mean, partly that's why it's fun for me is often what I would take is not what the community is taking, and so it's interesting to see when we're pointing these lists, you're like, oh, I would make this list, or I bet I could combine this with this. And sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm completely wrong. But
yeah.
It's fun to think through while you're doing it.
And there were I won't say it on this video, but there were some point changes to the Minnow Warlord, which I think right now is the hotness in beast herds.
I think he was one of the few things in that book that got more expensive.
And if I'm reading this right, he didn't get more expensive with the standard build. It's just the other builds got less expensive now. Yeah. So we might see some different Minnow Warlord builds, which is interesting. But man, that the net Minnow Warlord build is he's a monster. He's a monster.
Yeah.
And I guess, and lastly, with the reorganization of the monsters, the idea of doing a monster match list is always enticing. I haven't gone through really the nitty gritty of it yet, like how many monsters you can actually get in a list. But go ahead.
I keep waiting for people to take the Jabberwocks, and it's one of those things that
they keep getting cheaper and cheaper.
They keep getting cheaper, and at a certain point, these entries hit like. What you don't want to do is if you go too far, there's a point where with some entries, you hit a switch and all of a sudden they go from like not being taken to be taken at maximum in every list. Like trolls are actually, I think, very like that, where we're constantly having to be like, be real careful on trolls, because I feel like there's a point where you go from no trolls to all the trolls. And I kind of wonder if we're approaching that with the Jabberwocks, because they're a flying monster that is real cheap.
Yeah, I agree. They're very tempting. I feel like I feel like it's the same way with. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but it's the same way with Thyroscutus, where it keeps dropping. I'm seeing it on the table every once in a while. So anyway, let's jump ahead to the Saurians. I actually, while on this video, I got confirmation for us to be the official YouTube channel to review the Saurian Ancient point changes, because no one else wanted to do it. But because it's a little bit of a weird spot, because the Saurian Ancient book is the next one out, right? So these point changes are a little bit of a lame duck, like a little bit of the lame duck president. What do we do with this? But let's go through it.
And a lot of it, so I'm actually working on the Saurian book. I'm the RT person on the book. One, I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be a good book. Probably like February, March-ish. We still got to go through playtesting, and it depends how that goes. But so you'll still get, a quarter of a year with these new points. There were a number of things as well that we said, hey, let's try it out in the things we want to change for the lab. Can we experiment with the main Saurian book and see if it gets overused? And so there were a couple of things that were kind of a
I just want to point out that this might be a controversial opinion, but I'm really enjoying the new Saurian Ancient lore, how they're mixing it up. I'm excited to see how that translates to the book. I'm excited to see that.
And we really try to stick to the background that the background team has given us, both in design It can be frustrating at times because you're like, oh, I really want to do this, and we have a background person who's like, dude, you can't do that. But it's a lot of fun, and yeah. So spoiler alert, I think the new Saurians will be a lot of fun, and hopefully they'll be a good army. But the new Saurians, so they came in as the second worst army book, so a lot of point decreases across the board. One of the things we were a lot of the Slon powers went down.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
My favorite one. So this is one of the poor option. Soulfire.
Oh, you brought it up.
It used to be 125 points.
Yeah.
It's
so
now at 30.
This option was 125 points, and now it is 30 points because it has not been taken. So I want some brave soul out there to take Soulfire Weaver. And
hey, it's me
trying to talk Swamp Swimmer into taking that for a year and a half after the last points reduction.
I played a tournament with Evo, and I actually really liked Saurians with Evo. I think it's actually not a bad lore. I didn't play with Soulfire Weaver, so we'll see.
I've played a handful of games with Soulfire Weaver. This might be the bright spot of the points changes. I saw it and I'm like, oh, makes it even more enticing. But it's very situational for me. It's against the right list, it's kind of cool. Against the wrong list, it does nothing.
Yeah.
It's almost even like an opportunity cost because of how good the other powers are, right? So you it prevents you from using a slot, doesn't it? In a way, it's not just that it's in and of itself is an odd one, but yeah.
I mean, but when you look at, if the meta is demons and dark elves and
if it's elves,
squishy elves, elves, like Soulfire Weaver, I mean, those are the ones that are scared of it.
I completely agree. Let's talk about the non-price changes first. So first is the Skink Palanquin, which is really cool. The Plaque of the Snake God. This is the upgrade that gives the unit hatred. This is now 0 for 2 for the army and cannot be stomped. The cannot be stomped makes sense because it's in the back of the unit anyway.
So that was a rule change that all armies got because we were just trying to clean stuff up because there were some of these war platforms that could be stomped and some couldn't, and we just wanted to be more consistent across army books, so you didn't have to remember, can I stomp a dwarf guy on a throne or can't I? So basically, palanquins now across the game can't be stomped, but we also don't want people to build a wall of palanquins that would then neutralize monsters, so they all became 0 to 2.
Yep, makes sense. That makes sense. The second change is Jungle Gorilla or Dungle Gorilla. Look at that typo. Dungle Gorilla, 35%. It used to be 30%, so that's an extra 200. And welcome to the Dungle. Now that's an extra 225 points in Jungle Gorilla, which basically is Saurian Ancient shooting and fast calves kind of stuff.
That could be a big change because that was always a category that a lot of times we struggled to fill. So, yeah, that could be potentially a big boost to the army.
Because in a couple of my battle reports, I took the Skink gun line to the LA tournament, to the SoCal Joust.
Were you hitting Jungle Gorilla cap with that list?
Oh yeah, I was very close.
It's really easy, especially if you take skink, like shooting skinks out of core. It's very easy to hit that cap.
It's super easy if you put the poison javelins into the core units. That's easy to max out. It's super. I don't know. Like I think the Skink Cloud might give a little resurgence to the Skink Cloud, which is kind of cool. I always like that list.
Then the other change. Yeah, you can.
The other change is this is exactly the same as the Sentinels and Pathfinders from Sylvan Elves, where basically you can have 2 of either one of them, but you can't have 4 total. So the Ramphidons are 0 to 1 if you have 1 unit of Pterodons.
Vice versa.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't really see a reason they did this. The Pterodon, the Ramphidons are pretty good. They're very striky, and I see them in a fair amount of lists. But why was this decision made? If you know,
No,
did they come out of Jungle Gorilla?
they do.
So it wasn't specifically because of the Jungle Gorilla change. Like it wasn't like there was a build that we're trying to nerf. Honestly, this has a little bit to do with some things that might be happening in the new book, and we sort of wanted to see how it worked.
Okay.
So this is one. There were some concerns that we'd see flyer spam out of the increased jungle hunters, and then there was some things we were a little curious about with the lab, and so that's sort of why it was changed. It's a little bit of a hit, but I don't know. I don't think the 4 flyers is being taken that often. It was mostly 3 flyers, which you can still do.
I was seeing a handful of lists that did the double Ramphidon.
There are a couple people who get a little hurt by that, and I'm sorry, but there were some reasons. There was a long discussion about it, and honestly, it was an area that there wasn't great consensus across kind of everybody involved, and so spent a long time talking about it. This is kind of what we came up with for some reasons that I just won't get into here.
Fair enough. Let's move on to the special items. Nothing really big here, just a handful that went down 5 points. Oh, actually, no. The Sphere of Shielding went down 10. I think I'm the only one who would ever take a Sphere of Shielding. I do that a couple times. I like the Quaddle roaming around by himself out there in the middle of nowhere, but then it's extremely high risk. Like I played a couple games where
I still remember that boosted fates that took your Quaddle out bottom of 6 in that one game. Can you?
Yeah.
The Sphere of Shielding Quaddle is deathly afraid of Fate's Judgment and like cheap ambushers, like totemic summons. Yeah.
Pin him down.
Yeah, honestly, the Saurian items were not like they were relatively well balanced. Like there were a number of them that weren't being used as much, but other than the Sphere of Shielding, there weren't any that were like never taken. So that's why again you see a lot of 5-point decreases, which are always interesting because even a 5-point decrease can open up a new build. So that's always where you're curious, and we'll sit down and try to find some new stuff.
I was honestly I was expecting the Totem of Mixawaddle to go down more because I don't see that very often.
That's one that could potentially be pretty powerful though. And it was taken, what was it, 60, or it got a 0.67, which is a little like it's not a terrible score. It was being taken.
Okay.
But that Grasp of the Immortal Quaddle got hit by both the master increase and then also Grasp of the Immortal was the one that got taken the most.
Yeah, Grasp of the Immortal was definitely the most taken Quaddle upgrade by far, like hands down, right?
Yeah, and it goes up 10 points, I think.
So it's 10 points plus 25 from the base cost. So that's a big chunk.
Yeah. But it was by far the most taken combo.
Yeah.
And it does something that we gotta kind of look at. It did break the combo as well. Grasp of the Immortal plus Protean Potentate. That combo is not takeable anymore.
Oh yeah. 130. I'm sorry, 140. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
it is 100% Soulfire Weaver time.
Do it.
Bring it on.
All right.
But yeah, a lot of almost all the other things went down. So hopefully there'll be some stuff to make up for it. Or you just take Grasp of the Immortal and you save your 10 points on Symbiosis and you call it
I think the majority of Quaddle choices currently are a lot of them at least, are just the Quaddle with Grasp of the Immortal and screw the other upgrades. So I could see this still happening fairly often. It's just going to be more expensive.
Yeah, and again, 10 points is not that much.
Yeah. Saurian Veteran and Saurian Warlord. Looks like everything just went down a little bit. The alpha went down 30 points.
Yeah. Yeah, Alpha, that was one that surprised me a little bit just in the usage data. I thought it was going to be used more. Maybe that's just something that we see out here a little more than.
Yeah, I was going to say, I see it fairly often.
Alphas are pretty common in the US. Yeah.
I
guess maybe not.
Yeah, and then the baby Carnosaur went down for both of them, I think.
There's that one poor guy, Sunny, 187 or whatever he's on the board that uses that baby Carno.
Yeah, and it was actually funny because I think it was probably him who screwed up the data because we got this really weird result for because again, we suffer from some of the options have low usage data and it really kind of throws off the algorithm if there just aren't enough entries in. So we kind of have to, that's partly why we got to manually go through all this stuff afterwards. And we got this really weird result where like baby Carnosaurs were really popular and we were like, wait, what is happening?
No, that doesn't make sense.
This doesn't seem right. And when we dug through it, there was like one person who was playing them.
That guy, and he's been to like a gazillion tournaments, yeah.
So we did take kind of the mean into effect, not just this one guy throwing off the data.
Gotcha. Skin captain changes. It's all mounts. All the mounts went down. My one thing I'd say, I can definitely see the Ramphidon, the Alpha Ramphidon going on 10 points. Maybe seeing a few more Skin Captain Cowboys on Alpha Ramphidon.
And having made Saurian list, it was always one of those that you like. I always kind of looked at, and then at the end of the day, you're like, yeah, it's too expensive. So, well, maybe it gets a little more viable.
Now, and also the Taurosaur downgrade by 30. I didn't realize it was 30 points. That's a big chunk. Because they were cheap with a Skin Captain on top of them. They were cheaper than it was a cheap thing to do already, and with that points increase, like I could see a lot more Skin Captains in there on Alpha.
I believe they're actually the same price, or no, they're slightly more. The regular Taurosaur is 470, so it's a little bit more expensive.
To have a captain on it.
Yeah, so or actually I think it's the same price, but there's actually the weird downside where Skin Captain actually makes leadership lower.
Yep, and also it's
and you can get challenged out, which sucks on the turn you charge, which is that model.
And also it's the opportunity cost of spending those character points on the Taurosaur.
Yeah, but yeah, that's actually something I think pretty consistently across a lot of armies. Character like those kind of medium mount or like it's the hero level character mounts, the towering presence mounts, a lot of those went down because they weren't being used as much. So again, place to look at saving some points, or maybe there's an opportunity there, is I think a lot of the like Griffin mounts for wizards, or the that sort of thing, the Taurosaur for this guy, the Spider for the caster, like those were the ones that went down a lot.
I think the hero level or BSB characters that can go on towering presence models now for cheaper, I think we're going to see a lot more BSB monsters running around, 18-inch bubbles. Let's see, Skink Priest, just points went down 15 base, and the Taurosaur went down 35 points.
But remember, the 15 base is all apprentices, and they.
Yeah.
So that's just a game wide. But yeah, the Taurosaur goes down. So you can, what's a priest? 100 point.
That's a.
So it's actually
475.
I think a regular
Taurosaur. Apprentice on a Taurosaur?
Oh, 470. So it's almost a priest.
It's almost the same price.
Regular Taurosaur.
That's pretty nice. That is pretty nice. Let's move on to the Saurian Warriors. Base cost went down 10 points, one per individual model, and the Crocodile, which is +1 armor in close combat, went down 1 point per model.
Oof. I think that thing is actually. That's due for a comeback. Those things with 3-up armor is pretty nasty.
Especially with alchemy, with Word of Iron on them, it's just like, 1-up armor save.
they get expensive, although they'll get less expensive now. But yeah, that's you end up with like a.
Well, yeah, each additional model went down 2 points, and the overall unit went down 10. So that that adds up a lot for sure.
No, it's just one. It's just 1 point per additional model.
No, I know, but then also.
Yeah. Exactly. I see. Yeah.
You're saving a lot. Yeah. If you.
Okay. Skink Braves. In additional models went down 1 point. The Cayman and the shared units, the Skaman units, went down 5 points, and the bows went down 1 point.
Yeah, the bows I think were overpriced compared to what you get versus like ogre scraplings, goblin bows. Like they were not equivalent point wise. Saurian core overall, this was actually an active decision to try to help the army's overall power level a little bit by making all the core options just a little more attractive. And again, with core, like you still have to take whatever 20 to 25% of it. So at a certain point, you're still spending the points. You just get a little more out. You might get 2 to 4, 2 to 5 more models. But
well, the thing is, it's a little cheaper. You might see the combo of the bows with the what's the bow magic item?
The wildfire bow.
Wildfire bow, yeah.
Wildfire burst. Yeah.
Okay. Raptor Riders, they just went down on points. Base went down 10 points. Additional models went down 2.
So because that's the part is you have to think, what does that do for a max size unit? So a max size unit will go 20 points lower, right? You said 10 base and 2 additional.
Yeah.
So it's 20 points cheaper for 10.
It's nothing crazy. That's nothing crazy. Yeah. So this is next one coming up. I think this is a big deal. Snake Swarms. Base went down 10 points. Additional models went down 15, if I'm seeing that correctly.
But if I remember, Snake Swarms, you can only take like 4 models.
Still,
I don't think you get the that you used to.
No,
Also,
I
never even knew you could give these guys Scout. That's one of the fun things I like going through. I was like, wait, Scout is an option here?
One of the guys in our group, Daryl, he plays Saurian Ancients all the time, and he loves these guys, and he's gonna love this point change. But he used to run him 4 wide and just throw him out in front of his army and then countercharge. And he was relatively successful with them. I'm tempted to run these guys a little more myself.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you do, because they had terrible community data. They weren't on many or any tournament lists. So hopefully you take them and they're used a little bit.
We'll see. Okay, moving on. The Temple Guard. This is another interesting change. Base went down 15 points and additional models went down 1. The complaint about Temple Guard for a long time is just they're too expensive for what they do, and they're just not tough enough. Is this enough to overcome that hurdle? I don't know, but I'm
yeah, I feel like usually you're getting to about the right point when people have to start thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, maybe, yeah. That's usually when you're getting in the right range.
It's just I've run the Temple Guard a few different times, and it's just that always I don't think the problem is the price. It's just they're not quite tough enough rules wise.
Your twaddle in there.
Yeah.
And you have to protect him because he's a liability, and so yeah.
Well, this is like a 20 to 30 point buff for sort of medium to max size. That's pretty.
Okay. Ramphidon Riders. Additional models went down 10 points, and the shields went down 1 point. I don't think this is going to change too much. There's still very much a glass cannon, kind of skirting around the flanks and hitting soft targets.
Yeah.
Yep. Then they got hit with if you have pterodons, you can only have 1 unit of these guys.
Yeah.
Skink Hunters, starting size went down 5 points, nothing crazy. Pterodons went down 5 points for additional model and 1 point for the shields. Again, nothing crazy. I don't think this is going to change very much.
Yeah,
Um,
I still don't know that you're gonna put shields in your Pterodon riders.
yeah, there's no point to that. There really isn't. Stygiosaurs. The Mystic.
They just move some of the
Yeah.
cost
Mystic
of
Traveler's exact same points, but the base Stygiosaur is cheaper by what, 10 points?
Well, so Mystic Traveler went up 10 points and the base went down 10 points.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mystic Traveler option exactly the same because it was taken a pretty decent amount. There weren't as many naked Stygiosaurs being taken. And I say that actually, I took 3 of them to a tournament.
I was gonna say I did that once also. Yeah, and it was they're kind of good.
They were okay.
Yeah.
I think that's potentially a really attractive unit now. But yeah, it was essentially that's one of those places where we shift the cost a little bit to try to encourage different options.
Yeah, I think this is appealing if you want to try the Saurian Ancient Monster Mash and run 3 of these guys in a double Taurosaurs. That's interesting. Funny story, in a tournament I went to in Colorado, I ran the 3 naked Stygiosaurs, and I was playing against KOE, and he popped his Green Knight out, and I'm like, I am going to Breath Weapon this Green Knight into the Oblivion, and I didn't do it. And then my whole game...
That's the time you rolled a double.
It was my good friend Cody in Denver, Colorado. Cody, damn you. But anyway, moving on. Taurosaur base cost went down 5 points. Fair enough. I didn't think they go down. They're pretty commonly taken.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one probably had decent usage data, but it's a bottom tier.
That was that was one of the changes that there was a little bit given just to get, because sometimes you objectively make changes to try to improve external power level, and that was one of them. Again, at 5 points, probably not going to make a huge difference.
And lastly, the Thyroscutus, the good old, in the bottom of my heart, Thyroscutus. The Alter the Snake God went down 15 points, and the Sun Engine, which I use most often, went down 10 points. It's now at 260, and the Alter is 240 for this cavalry with 5 wounds and a 1-up armor save, toughness 5.
Yeah, I thought they were interesting point wise. I brought them to a couple of tournaments. I could never really make them work. They're just not. They don't work for me. They're not bad. I think the really interesting thing is I believe that you can now take 2 Taurosaurs and 2 of the Thyroscutuses when before you could take 2 and 1. I think. I'm remembering that right. So you can squeeze an extra monster out of there, but yeah, it's interesting. It's a unit you still haven't seen used very much, and hopefully we see them on the board.
I'm excited. I used to run them with. I feel like you have to run them with Druidism because the 1-up armor save is great, but if you get the 1-up with a 4-up 8 regen, or sorry, not regen. What is it? Fortitude save? If you have a 1-up armor with a 4-up fortitude, they'll stick wherever you want them to stick.
Well, and
stop thinking about Druidism. All about the Soulfire Weaver. That's it. Just think
No, but really,
Druidism on
really,
Soulfire
what
Weaver.
makes them great, the Sun Engine, is that the extra channel. If you run 2 of them, the extra 2 channel to really support your Quaddle or your Skink casters.
And again, like if you're looking at it, you might be a Saurian Ancient player going, "Oh my God, the Quaddle with Master of Reality went up." Grasp of the Immortal. I mixed those 2 up.
Grasp of the Immortal.
Grasp went up 35 points at a bottom tier army. What am I supposed to do about that? I mean, we just pointed out like 8 places where you save that cost. So take it.
Yep.
It's still good. It's the same thing it was before. You just pick up the points in Thyroscutuses and Saurus additional models.
No, I'm excited. I'm excited for both Saurian Ancient and for Beast Herds. I'm gonna go down. I'm gonna do it. I'm going down the freaking Soulfire Weaver rabbit hole, and it's gonna be fantastic. And ambush beasters.
And ambush beasters.
Next year when we
You're
look
gonna
at the
chain it
data,
up.
we're going to be like, man, Soulfire Weaver, why did it get taken so much? And it's going to be that one guy in California who took Soulfire Weaver every time.
Woo. Okay, so quick question. Soulfire Weaver, you're a Quaddle. What are the 4 out of the 6 evocation spells you take, Caps?
Reroll the wound, -1, resilience. So what's that? 1 and 2. Probably take.
And then the 2 snipes? Yeah, and then the 2 snipes.
Take at least one of the snipes, and then maybe the second snipe, or maybe you take reroll the hit, depending on the thing. And then you probably in some way either heirloom or
Heirloom. Yeah.
Get the hereditary.
Train from birth. You can get another spell.
Oh,
That's a good question.
dance.
Now
Dance change
Maybe.
for the big
Dance-
infantry bricks is kind
Dance
of
is the new Dance is the new Ravenwing. I mean, like, is that going to work in a Saurian Ancient army? Where do you want that extra movement from?
When I played it, I had a Evo slot Quaddle. I had a guy on a Alpha. I had 3 Stygiosaurs, 1 with Mystic Traveler, and then I had 2 units of Ramphidons and I think some core. And the Evo really helped because I had a lot of things that put out a lot of low strength attacks, like the Toxic Breath Weapon and the Ramphidon attacks. They have good AP, they hit reasonably well, but they need help wounding, and you got 2 spells in Evo that let you wound better. You get the -1 toughness and the reroll the wound. So it was a combo that worked okay. You know,
I gotta step away for 1 second, guys. Sorry.
I actually have to.
You can yell
I'm
that.
getting the yeah.
Should we just ditch
The
Kenyon?
mean eye from the wife. Nobody's here when he comes back. Bye, everybody. He can do some editing magics like he was there. No, I think this was I appreciate you walking through it, Caps, and I think it was a really good insight into, you know, I think 1, the level of rigor, you know, 2, the amount of work, and also, you know, good to just kind of hear your perspectives on it, because I think it's great to hear, you know,
in most
great
cases
players
we're
think
not
about it. So.
just throwing darts at a board. Like we are trying to use data and use community feedback and, you know, talk to people who play the armies, and we're trying to get, you know, honest, good feedback and make adjustments based on that. So, you know, sometimes I think in isolation, some things maybe don't make sense or don't seem reasonable, but, and we make mistakes too, but I would say in general, we usually have a reason for the things we're doing, and we're not crazy people who just hate your army.
I think the best part of it is that this videos like this and all the information you're releasing on the website, it's at least in some, it's not perfect, but it's not 100% transparent, but at least all the players get a view into what's happening. That makes me feel a lot better. It's not like what it was with previous games where it was just like, when the information was released, it's just some sort of magical thing that was there. We can kind of see a little bit of the nuts and bolts behind it, which is, I think, great.
And I'd really encourage, if you think something didn't change that should, or you don't like what happened with your army, get involved, be active on your forums, talk to your ACS people, fill out the surveys when they come out, you know, play games, go to tournaments. Like, that's the data we're looking at. Be engaged and you'll have a bigger voice.
All right, I think with that, we can call it quits. I want to give a big thank you to Mr. Caps for being on this video.
Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Hey, if anyone's still listening, please like and subscribe. I keep saying it every video. And everyone have a good evening. Bye.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.